The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Rosie's Diner as Kenny Rogers pulled his rental car into a space near the back, away from the main entrance. He preferred these kinds of places. Small-town establishments where the coffee was strong, the food was honest, and nobody expected anything more than a good meal and friendly service. The chrome and red vinyl aesthetic of the 1950s-style diner spoke of simpler times when a cup of coffee cost a quarter and conversation came free with every order. Kenny had been driving since dawn, making his way from Nashville to a small recording session in Memphis when hunger and the promise of authentic home cooking had drawn him off the interstate. The hand-painted sign out front advertised "Best Pie in Tennessee" and "Home cooking like Mama used to make." Claims that experience had taught him were either completely true or utterly false, with very little middle ground. As he approached the glass door adorned with local business cards and community announcements, Kenny could hear the familiar sounds of a busy diner, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, the clink of silverware against plates, the comfortable murmur of morning conversation among regular customers who probably gathered here every day to solve the world's problems over eggs and hash browns. But there was something else too. Something that made Kenny pause with his hand on the door handle. Someone was singing. The voice was coming from the kitchen area, barely audible over the cooking sounds and customer chatter, but unmistakably beautiful. It was a woman's voice, rich and soulful, carrying a melody that seemed to transform the ordinary morning atmosphere into something magical. The song was Amazing Grace, but sung with such personal interpretation and emotional depth that it sounded like a completely new composition. Kenny stood frozen on the threshold, listening to a voice that seemed to understand something profound about the meaning behind the familiar hymn. This wasn't casual humming or absent-minded singing while working. This was artistry, pure and simple, happening in the most unlikely of places. As he finally pushed through the door, the little bell above announced his arrival with a cheerful chime. The singing stopped immediately, as if the singer had suddenly become aware that someone might be listening. Kenny felt a strange sense of loss, as if a beautiful bird had been startled into silence. The interior of Rosie's Diner was exactly what the exterior had promised. Red vinyl booths with chrome trim, a long counter with swivel stools, and walls covered with local memorabilia, vintage advertisements, and photographs of the town's history. The air smelled of coffee, bacon, and the kind of comfort food that made people drive miles out of their way just to experience again. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," called a middle-aged waitress with kind eyes and the efficient movements of someone who'd been working in diners for decades. Her name tag read Dolores, and she carried a coffee pot in one hand and a genuine smile that suggested she actually enjoyed her work. Kenny chose a booth near the back, one that gave him a good view of the entire diner while keeping him relatively inconspicuous. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to observe and understand a place was to blend into the background and let the natural rhythms of daily life unfold around him. As Dolores approached with a menu and the promised coffee, Kenny found himself listening carefully for any sign that the beautiful singing might resume. The kitchen was visible through a pass-through window, where he could see the usual organized chaos of a busy short-order operation. Plates being assembled, orders being called out, the constant dance of professional food preparation. "You just passing through, or are you here for the pie?" Dolores asked with a smile as she filled his coffee cup. "Because if you're here for the pie, you made the right choice. Our baker makes everything from scratch, and I'm not just saying that because she's standing right there in the kitchen." Kenny followed Dolores' gesture toward the kitchen, where he caught a glimpse of a woman in her early 40s working at a prep station. She had auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and even from this distance, Kenny could see that she approached her work with the kind of careful attention that suggested real pride in craftsmanship. "What kind would you recommend?" Kenny asked, though he was more interested in learning about the baker than in actually ordering pie at 9 in the morning. "Well, the apple is her specialty. Uses her grandmother's recipe with just a hint of cardamom that makes all the difference. But honestly, you can't go wrong with anything she makes. Maria's got magic hands when it comes to baking." "Maria." Kenny filed the name away, wondering if this was the same person who'd been singing with such extraordinary beauty just minutes earlier. "I'll have the apple pie then," Kenny said, "and maybe some eggs and bacon to go with it." As Dolores headed back toward the kitchen to place his order, Kenny settled into his booth and took in the morning crowd. There were the usual suspects, construction workers grabbing a quick breakfast before heading to job sites, elderly men who probably gathered here every morning to discuss local politics and reminisce about better times, a young mother trying to convince her toddler that pancakes were indeed food and not toys. But Kenny's attention kept drifting back toward the kitchen, hoping to hear that remarkable voice again. There was something about the quality of the singing he'd heard that suggested real training, real talent. The kind of natural ability that couldn't be faked or learned from YouTube videos. It was about 10 minutes later, as the breakfast rush began to wind down and the diner settled into its mid-morning rhythm, that Kenny heard it again. This time it was a different song, Danny Boy, sung with such heartfelt emotion that several customers actually paused their conversations to listen. The voice carried a depth of feeling that spoke of genuine understanding of loss and longing, transforming a familiar Irish ballad into something deeply personal and moving. Kenny found himself leaning forward in his booth, straining to hear every note. This was the kind of voice that came along once in a generation, technically proficient but also emotionally honest, capable of finding new meaning in songs that had been performed thousands of times before. The singing continued for several minutes, weaving through verses with increasing confidence, as if the singer was becoming lost in the music and forgetting where she was. Kenny could see other customers beginning to notice too, their conversations growing quieter as the beautiful melody filled the diner. Then, suddenly, everything changed. "Maria, what the hell do you think you're doing?" The harsh voice cut through the morning peace like a knife, and the singing stopped so abruptly it was as if someone had flipped a switch. Kenny turned toward the source of the interruption and saw a heavy-set man in his 50s emerging from what appeared to be an office area behind the counter. His face was red with anger, and he carried himself with the aggressive posture of someone who enjoyed wielding whatever small amount of power he possessed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Patterson," came a quiet voice from the kitchen. You were just disrupting my customers with your caterwauling." The man, obviously the owner or manager, interrupted loudly. "This is a diner, not a concert hall. People come here to eat, not to listen to you showing off." Kenny felt his jaw clench as he watched the scene unfold. The entire diner had gone quiet now, with customers shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they witnessed what was clearly an unfair and public humiliation. "But Mr. Patterson, nobody was complaining." Maria's voice drifted from the kitchen, though Kenny could hear that she was trying very hard to keep it steady. "You thought wrong," Patterson snapped. "This is the third time this month I've had to tell you to keep quiet while you work. Apparently you're not getting the message." Kenny could see Dolores and the other staff members exchanging uncomfortable glances. It was obvious that this wasn't the first time they'd witnessed their boss treating Maria poorly, and it was equally obvious that they felt powerless to intervene. "I understand," Maria said quietly. "It won't happen again." "You're damn right it won't happen again," Patterson replied, his voice carrying clearly throughout the now silent diner. "Because you're fired. I'm tired of having to babysit employees who can't follow simple instructions. Clean out your locker and get out." The words hit the diner like a physical blow. Kenny saw several customers look down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable with witnessing such casual cruelty. Dolores actually took a step forward as if she might intervene, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "Mr. Patterson, please." Maria's voice was barely audible now, and Kenny could hear the beginning of tears. "I need this job. I have a daughter to support and—" "Should have thought of that before you decided to turn my kitchen into your personal stage," Patterson interrupted without a trace of sympathy. "Maybe next time you'll remember that work is for working, not for entertaining yourself." Kenny felt something hot and angry rising in his chest. He'd spent his entire career in the music business, and he'd encountered plenty of people who didn't understand or appreciate musical talent. But this was different. This was a man using his position of power to crush something beautiful simply because he didn't value it, destroying someone's livelihood for the crime of bringing joy into the world. As Kenny watched Maria emerge from the kitchen, her face pale and her hands trembling as she untied her apron, he made a decision that would change several lives in ways he couldn't have imagined. "Excuse me," Kenny said, standing up from his booth and walking toward the counter with the confident stride of someone who was used to being heard. "I couldn't help but overhear the conversation, and I think there might be a misunderstanding here." Patterson turned toward Kenny with the annoyed expression of someone who didn't appreciate interference in his business. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is a private employee matter. If you'll just return to your seat—" "Actually, I think this concerns me directly," Kenny interrupted smoothly. "You see, I'm in the music business, and I was just listening to the most beautiful singing I've heard in months. I was hoping to speak with the young lady about it." The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Kenny could see recognition beginning to dawn in Patterson's eyes, while Maria stood frozen near the kitchen door, her apron clutched in her hands and tears threatening to spill over. You're Kenny Rogers," Patterson stammered, his aggressive demeanor suddenly replaced by nervous deference. I am, Kenny confirmed quietly. And I have to say, I'm pretty disappointed by what I just witnessed. That young lady has a gift that most people would give anything to possess. And instead of being proud that someone so talented works here, you're firing her for sharing that gift with the world. Patterson's face went through several shades of red as he struggled to process this unexpected turn of events. Mr. Rogers, I had no idea you were here, or that you were listening. Would it have made a difference? Kenny asked pointedly. Would you have treated her differently if you'd known a famous person was listening? Because if that's the case, then we have an even bigger problem here. Kenny turned to look at Maria, who was staring at him with an expression of complete bewilderment. Up close, he could see that she was probably in her early 40s, with the kind of natural beauty that came from genuine kindness rather than artificial enhancement. But more than that, he could see in her eyes the look of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. Someone who had learned to expect disappointment, but still harbored dreams she was afraid to acknowledge. Maria, is it? Kenny asked gently. She nodded, apparently not trusting herself to speak. That was you singing Amazing Grace when I came in, wasn't it? Another nod. And Danny Boy just now? Yes, sir, she whispered. Where did you learn to sing like that? Maria glanced nervously at Patterson, who was watching the exchange with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing his own career imploding in real time. My grandmother taught me when I was little, Maria said quietly. She said music was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you, no matter how hard life got. Kenny felt his heart constrict at the simple wisdom of those words. Your grandmother was a smart woman. Have you ever performed professionally? Maria shook her head. I wanted to, when I was younger. I even auditioned for a few things in Nashville. But then I got pregnant with my daughter and her father left, and I needed steady work with benefits. I've been here for 8 years now. 8 years, Kenny repeated, looking around the diner with new understanding. This woman had been hiding extraordinary talent in a place where it wasn't valued, supporting her child by doing honest work while keeping her dreams locked away in her heart. Kenny turned back to Patterson, who was now sweating despite the morning coolness. Let me ask you something. How's business been lately? Patterson looked confused by the change of subject. Well, we're doing okay, but because I've been sitting here watching your customers, and I noticed something interesting, Kenny continued. When Maria was singing, everyone stopped what they were doing to listen. They looked happy, peaceful, like they were experiencing something special. That's the kind of atmosphere that makes people want to come back, that makes them tell their friends about a place. Kenny gestured around the diner. You could have the most unique establishment in Tennessee right here. A place where people come not just for good food, but for beautiful music. Instead, you're throwing away something that could transform your business because you don't recognize its value. Patterson opened and closed his mouth several times, clearly struggling to find words. Finally, he managed, Mr. Rogers, I didn't realize… if I'd known… If you'd known what? That someone with actual knowledge of music might hear her? That someone who could recognize talent might be listening? Kenny's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath the politeness. Maria's voice doesn't become less beautiful just because I'm not here to hear it. Kenny turned back to Maria, who had been following the conversation with wide eyes, as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Maria, I'd like to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. If you could do anything with your life, anything at all, what would it be? Maria was quiet for a long moment, and Kenny could see her struggling with the fear of admitting to dreams she'd learned to keep hidden. I'd want to sing, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'd want to make music that helps people feel less alone in the world. Kenny nodded. That's exactly what I thought you'd say. And that's exactly what you were doing when I walked in here this morning. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Maria, I run a recording studio in Nashville and I work with a lot of different artists. I also know people in the music business who are always looking for talented singers for various projects. Would you be interested in coming to Nashville to audition? Maria stared at the business card as if it were made of gold. I don't understand. You want me to audition? For what? For a chance to use your gift the way it was meant to be used, Kenny said simply. I can't promise you'll become a star, but I can promise you'll get a fair hearing from people who understand what real talent sounds like." Tears were flowing freely down Maria's cheeks now, and Kenny could see her hands shaking as she reached for the business card. "But what about my daughter? I can't just leave her, and I can't afford to take time off from work to go to Nashville for an audition." "How old is your daughter?" Kenny asked. 15. She's a sophomore in high school." Kenny smiled. "Old enough to understand that sometimes we have to take risks to build a better future. And as for taking time off work," he glanced pointedly at Patterson. "I think that situation has already been resolved." Patterson, who had been standing frozen during this entire exchange, suddenly seemed to come back to life. "Now wait just a minute," he blustered. "I didn't actually fire her. I was just making a point about workplace behavior. Maria, your job is here if you want it." Kenny looked at the man with undisguised contempt. 5 minutes ago, you were throwing her out for sharing her gift with the world. Now that you realize that gift might be worth something, suddenly you want to keep her?" He turned back to Maria. "The choice is yours, of course. But I'll tell you this. Talent like yours doesn't come along often, and opportunities to use it come along even less often. If you're willing to take a chance on yourself, I'm willing to take a chance on you." Maria looked around the diner, taking in the faces of her fellow employees who were watching with expressions of encouragement and hope. Dolores actually gave her a small nod and mouthed the words, "Go for it." "What would I need to do?" Maria asked, her voice growing stronger. "Come to Nashville this weekend. I'll arrange for you to work with some musicians, record a few songs, see how you handle being in a professional studio environment. If it goes well, we'll talk about next steps." Kenny pulled out another business card, this one from his wallet. "This is my personal number. Call me tomorrow and we'll work out the details. I'll cover your travel expenses and make sure you have a place to stay." Maria stared at the cards in her hand as if they might disappear at any moment. "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me." Kenny smiled, thinking about all the times in his career when someone had taken a chance on him. All the doors that had opened because someone had seen potential in a young musician from Texas who was more ambitious than polished. "Maria, I've been in the music business for most of my adult life, and I've learned that real talent is the rarest thing in the world. When you find it in an unexpected place, being sung by someone who doesn't even realize how special they are, you don't walk away from it. You nurture it, you help it grow, and you make sure it gets the chance to touch as many lives as possible." He gestured toward the diner. "Every person in this room stopped what they were doing to listen to you sing. That's not something that happens by accident. That's the mark of someone who has something important to offer the world." Maria wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders, and Kenny could see the exact moment when she made her decision. "Okay," she said, her voice clear and strong for the first time since he'd entered the diner. "I'll do it. I'll come to Nashville." The diner erupted in spontaneous applause, led by Dolores and quickly joined by every customer in the place. Even the construction workers, who had been trying to pretend they weren't listening to the entire conversation, put down their coffee cups to clap. Kenny felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced the first time he'd heard his own song on the radio, the first time an audience had sung along with his music. It was the joy of knowing that somewhere in the world, there was a little more beauty than there had been before. As the applause died down, Kenny turned back to Patterson, who was looking like a man who had just realized he'd thrown away a winning lottery ticket. "Let me give you some free advice," Kenny said quietly. "In this business, in any business really, the most valuable thing you can have is people who care about what they do." Maria cared so much about bringing joy to people that she was willing to risk her job for it. That kind of passion is worth more than you could ever pay someone. Patterson nodded weakly. "I understand that now, Mr. Rogers. If Maria wants to come back after Nashville, she'll always have a job here, and she can sing as much as she wants." Kenny looked at Maria, who was still clutching the business cards like lifelines. "Something tells me that after this weekend, Maria is going to have a lot more opportunities than just coming back here. But I appreciate the gesture." Over the next hour, as Kenny finished his breakfast and Maria made arrangements with her fellow employees to pick up her final paycheck, word spread through the small town that something extraordinary had happened at Rosie's diner. People began showing up just to meet the young woman who had caught Kenny Rogers' attention, to hear the story of how a chance encounter had changed someone's life forever. Maria sang one more song before she left that morning, "Will the Circle Be Unbroken?" And this time she sang it with the confidence of someone who knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Her voice filled every corner of the diner, and Kenny could see that she was no longer hiding her light under a bushel. She was letting it shine for everyone to see. As Kenny prepared to leave for Memphis, Maria approached him one final time. "Mr. Rogers," she said, "I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity." "Don't thank me yet," Kenny replied with a smile. "Thank me after you've worked harder than you've ever worked in your life, after you've discovered what you're really capable of when you stop holding yourself back." "What if I'm not good enough?" Maria asked, the first note of doubt creeping into her voice. Kenny looked at her seriously. "Maria, I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between someone who can sing and someone who is a singer. You're a singer. Everything else is just details." 3 months later, Kenny received a package at his Nashville office. Inside was a professionally produced CD titled "Finding My Voice" by Maria Santos. The cover photo showed Maria sitting at a piano, her face radiant with the kind of joy that comes from finally living your true purpose. Kenny put the CD into his player and listened as Maria's voice filled his office with songs that told the story of her journey. From dreams deferred to dreams fulfilled. From hiding in a small-town diner to standing in Nashville recording studios. From singing for tips to singing for the pure love of music. The opening track was "Amazing Grace," the same song Kenny had heard her singing that first morning at Rosie's Diner. But this version was different, fuller, more confident, backed by professional musicians but still carrying all the emotional honesty that had stopped him in his tracks that day. But it was the final track that moved Kenny most deeply. Called "The Stranger in the Diner," it was Maria's original composition about their meeting, about how sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as ordinary encounters, about how dreams can be reborn when we least expect it. Kenny played the song 3 times before picking up his phone to call his contact at Columbia Records. Maria's debut album deserved a wider audience than local radio could provide, and he knew exactly the person who could make that happen. 6 months later, "Finding My Voice" became a surprise hit on both the country and inspirational charts. Music critics praised Maria's authentic voice and emotional depth, calling her a mature artist with something important to say and proof that real talent can emerge from anywhere. But for Kenny, the real reward came when he attended Maria's first major concert at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville. As he watched her command the historic stage with grace and confidence, backed by some of the finest musicians in the city, he remembered the frightened woman he'd met in a small-town diner, singing while she worked and hiding her light from the world. Maria dedicated her final song that night to "The Stranger Who Stopped to Listen When Everyone Else Just Heard Noise," as she sang "Amazing Grace" with the full backing of a gospel choir. Kenny felt tears streaming down his face, knowing that somewhere in Tennessee there was a 15-year-old girl watching her mother live her dreams and learning that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. After the concert, Maria found Kenny backstage and hugged him tightly, just as she had that morning at the diner. "You saved my life," she whispered, echoing words she'd spoken many times over the past year. "No," Kenny replied. "You saved your own life. I just reminded you that it was worth saving." Maria pulled back and looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You know what the most amazing part of all this is? My daughter was so proud when she saw what I was willing to risk for my dreams that she started taking voice lessons herself. Yesterday, she told me she wants to be a music teacher so she can help other people find their voices too." Kenny smiled, thinking about the ripple effects of that single morning at Rosie's Diner, about how one act of recognition had not only changed Maria's life, but was now inspiring the next generation to pursue their own dreams. He thought about Maria's 15-year-old daughter, Sophia, whom he'd met several times over the past year, and how she'd transformed from a shy teenager who was embarrassed by her mother's silly singing into a confident young woman who understood that pursuing your dreams was an act of courage, not selfishness. "Maria, I've learned something in all my years in music. The most beautiful songs are the ones that inspire other people to sing. Your voice didn't just entertain people. It gave them permission to believe in their own dreams." After the concert that night, Kenny found himself staying later than usual, watching as Maria signed autographs and spoke with fans who had traveled from across the country to hear her perform. Each conversation seemed to carry the same theme. People thanking Maria not just for her music, but for showing them that it was never too late to pursue what they loved. An elderly man with calloused hands and work clothes approached Maria with tears in his eyes. "Miss Santos," he said quietly, "I heard your story on the radio last month. I used to play guitar when I was young, but I put it away when I got married and started working construction. After hearing about you, I picked it up again. My wife says I haven't been this happy in 20 years. A middle-aged woman who introduced herself as a nurse told Maria that she'd started writing songs again after hearing The Stranger in the Diner. I thought I was too old, too practical, she said. But if you could start over at 42, maybe I can start over at 55. Kenny watched these interactions with a growing sense of wonder. This was what music was supposed to do. Not just entertain, but transform. Not just reach people's ears, but touch their souls and remind them of who they were beneath all the practical considerations and societal expectations that so often buried our truest selves. As the crowd finally began to thin out, Maria approached Kenny with a look of exhaustion mixed with profound satisfaction. "Every show is like this now," she said. "People don't just come to hear music, they come to remember their own dreams." "That's a heavy responsibility," Kenny observed. "It is," Maria agreed. "But it's also the greatest gift I could ever ask for. When I was singing in that diner kitchen, I thought I was just making my own day a little brighter. I never imagined that someday my voice could help other people find their own." As Kenny drove home through the familiar streets of Nashville that night, he thought about the power of really listening to the people around us, about how often we miss the extraordinary because we're too busy focusing on the ordinary. The radio played softly, and when one of Maria's newer songs came on, Second Chances, a duet she'd recorded with her daughter Sophia, Kenny felt that familiar warmth in his chest that came from witnessing something truly special. Maria's story had reminded him why he'd fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for the fame or the money, but for those magical moments when the right song reaches the right person at exactly the right time and changes everything. He thought about all the times in his own career when his music had touched someone's life. All the letters he'd received from fans who said his songs had helped them through difficult times or celebrated their happiest moments. But there was something different about Maria's impact. While Kenny's songs had certainly moved people and provided comfort during hard times, Maria's story was actively inspiring people to change their lives. She wasn't just offering solace. She was offering hope and practical proof that dreams could come true at any age, under any circumstances. The following week, Kenny received a call from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell Maria's story on a national level. "This isn't just about one woman becoming a singer," the filmmaker explained. "This is about the countless people whose lives have been changed by her example. We found construction workers who started bands, teachers who became songwriters, retirees who opened music schools. Her story is creating a movement." Kenny wasn't surprised. In the year since Maria's debut album, he'd watched her influence spread far beyond the music industry. The scholarship fund she'd established for single mothers pursuing music careers had already helped dozens of women who might otherwise have given up on their dreams. Her annual benefit concerts raised money not just for music education, but for programs that helped working people pursue artistic endeavors without sacrificing their ability to support their families. More than that, Maria had become a symbol of something larger. The idea that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be, that extraordinary talent exists in ordinary places, and that sometimes all it takes is one person who believes in you to change everything. In the years that followed, Kenny watched Maria's career flourish in ways that neither of them could have imagined that morning at Rosie's Diner. She released 3 more albums, each one reaching higher on the charts than the last. She performed at the Grand Ole Opry, Carnegie Hall, and concert venues around the world. She won Grammy Awards, Country Music Association Awards, and Gospel Music Awards. Music critics consistently praised her authentic voice and emotional depth, calling her a true artist in an industry often focused more on image than substance. But perhaps more importantly, Maria used her platform to champion other overlooked artists. She made it a point to collaborate with unknown singers, to feature local musicians as opening acts for her concerts, and to speak publicly about the importance of recognizing talent wherever it might be found. Her production company, Second Chances Music, specialized in finding and developing artists who had been overlooked by the mainstream industry. Older performers who had given up on their dreams, immigrants whose accents were considered unmarketable, working-class musicians who lacked the connections to break into the business. Maria established a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing careers in music, understanding firsthand how difficult it could be to follow your dreams while supporting a family. The fund grew into a full non-profit organization that provided not just financial assistance, but mentorship, childcare support, and professional development opportunities for women who wanted to pursue music careers later in life. She frequently performed benefit concerts, always ending with the story of how a stranger's willingness to really listen had changed her life forever. These concerts became legendary in the music community, not just for Maria's performances, but for the opportunity they provided for audience members to discover new artists. Maria made it a tradition to feature scholarship recipients and other second-chance musicians as part of every benefit show. Years later, when interviewers asked Kenny about the most meaningful encounter of his career, he wouldn't talk about his hit songs or famous collaborations. Instead, he would tell them about finding Maria singing in that diner kitchen, about the transformative power of recognizing hidden talent, about how the most important music often happens in the most unexpected places. Maria taught me that being successful isn't just about what you achieve for yourself, Kenny would say in interviews. It's about what you help others achieve. The greatest gift I've ever received wasn't any award or recognition. It was the privilege of watching someone step into their true calling and then use that calling to lift up others. Kenny often reflected on how that single moment of paying attention, of really listening instead of just hearing, had created ripples that continued to spread years later. Maria's daughter Sophia had indeed become a music teacher, but she'd taken it a step further, developing programs that brought music education to underserved communities. Sophia often told her students about the morning her mother was fired for singing at work and how that apparent disaster had become the best thing that ever happened to their family. Sometimes, Sophia would tell her students, "The worst day of your life is actually the first day of your real life. You just have to be brave enough to see the opportunity hidden in the challenge." Rosie's Diner still operates in that small Tennessee town, and they've kept a plaque by the door that reads, "Home of Maria Santos," whose voice reminds us that dreams can come true anywhere. The current management, having learned from the previous owner's mistake, encourages employees to sing while they work, understanding that music makes everything better: the work, the atmosphere, and the lives of everyone who hears it. The diner has become something of a pilgrimage site for aspiring musicians and people seeking inspiration. Tour buses regularly stop there, and the walls are covered with photographs of Maria's visits and letters from people whose lives have been changed by her story. The staff is trained to tell visitors about the morning when a country music legend stopped for breakfast and ended up discovering a hidden treasure. Patterson, the former manager who had fired Maria, eventually reached out to apologize publicly. In a letter that Maria read aloud during one of her benefit concerts, he wrote, "I want to publicly apologize to Maria Santos and to everyone who heard about how I treated her that morning. I was so focused on what I thought was appropriate workplace behavior that I completely missed something beautiful and special happening right in front of me. Maria's success isn't just her triumph, it's proof that I was wrong about what matters in this world." Patterson's letter continued, "Since Maria's story became known, I've tried to become a different kind of manager, a different kind of person. I listen more carefully now, and I try to recognize and encourage the special talents of the people around me. Maria taught me that crushing someone's spirit is never acceptable, no matter what kind of authority you think you have." Maria returns to perform at the diner every year on the anniversary of her meeting with Kenny, always singing for free because she never wants to forget where her journey began. The performance has become a beloved community tradition, drawing people from hundreds of miles away who want to witness the place where an act of simple human recognition transformed not just one life, but countless others. These annual concerts have become more than just performances. They're celebrations of the power of second chances, of the importance of seeing people's potential rather than just their circumstances. Local news stations cover the event, and it's been featured in national magazines and television programs as an example of how small acts of kindness can create extraordinary changes. The last time Kenny attended one of these anniversary concerts, he was struck by how the event had evolved beyond just celebrating Maria's success. The concert now featured performances by scholarship recipients, local musicians who had been inspired by Maria's story, and even some of the customers who had been in the diner that original morning. It had become a testament to the idea that everyone has something valuable to offer if we just take the time to notice. During that particular concert, an elderly woman approached the microphone during the open mic portion of the evening. She introduced herself as Mrs. Henderson and explained that she had been one of the customers in the diner the morning Maria was fired. "I want to tell you all something," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion. I was there that morning, sitting in my usual booth, when that awful man yelled at Maria for singing, and I'm ashamed to say that I didn't speak up. I didn't defend her. I just sat there and let it happen. The crowd listened in respectful silence as Mrs. Henderson continued. But I want you to know that Maria's voice that morning and her courage in the face of that cruelty changed something in me. I went home and called my granddaughter, who had been afraid to audition for her school musical because she thought she wasn't good enough. I told her about Maria, about how talent deserves to be shared, not hidden. My granddaughter auditioned, got the lead role, and is now studying musical theater in college. Mrs. Henderson wiped tears from her eyes. Maria, your voice didn't just survive that terrible morning. It multiplied. It inspired not just Mr. Rogers to help you, but all of us who witnessed it to be braver, to speak up for beauty and talent wherever we find it. The story illustrated something Kenny had come to understand about Maria's impact. It wasn't just about one woman's success, but about how her courage had given permission to countless others to pursue their own dreams and to defend beauty and talent wherever they encountered it. In the end, Maria's story became a testament to several profound truths. That talent exists everywhere, often in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone to notice and nurture it. That the most important moments in our lives often come disguised as ordinary encounters. And that we never know when we might have the opportunity to change someone's life with a simple act of recognition and kindness. The voice that had once been hidden in a diner kitchen had grown into a force for hope and inspiration, proving that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from concert halls or recording studios, but from the courage to really listen to the people around us, to see the extraordinary in what others might dismiss as ordinary. Kenny Rogers had stopped for breakfast that morning and ended up witnessing the birth of a dream. Maria Santos had been fired for singing at work and ended up discovering her true calling. Sometimes the most important moments in our lives come disguised as the worst ones, and sometimes all it takes is one person who cares enough to really listen. But perhaps the most beautiful part of the story was how it continued to create new chapters long after that first encounter. Every person who heard Maria sing, every scholarship recipient who got a second chance, every child who was inspired by Sophia's music classes, every customer at Rosie's Diner who was encouraged to pursue their own dreams, they all became part of a larger story about the power of human connection and the importance of recognizing the extraordinary potential that exists in ordinary people. The melody that began in a small-town diner had grown into a symphony of hope, proving that sometimes the most important music isn't written in studios or performed on stages, but created in the moments when we choose to see and celebrate the gifts of the people around us. And in a world that often seems focused on tearing people down, Maria's story stood as a reminder that we all have the power to build each other up, to listen for the music in unexpected places, and to help others find their voices and share them with the world. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their dreams matter. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about the unexpected ways people can change each other's lives, and leave a comment below about a time when someone believed in your potential when you couldn't see it yourself. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most ordinary places, and sometimes all we need is one person who cares enough to really listen.